Hi guys, it's an overcast Saturday morning, a little after 10:30ish, and I might hit the road today. I actually haven't been out for 3 days, so I really could do with a bit of exercise, and I probably should do that. Had a rough night. There was a party on downstairs right below me, and that went to a little after midnight, and that was fairly noisy. But they stopped probably about 12:30, so I thought, oh, Friday night, 12:30, fair enough, you know. But then, as soon as they stopped, my immediate neighbour below me started to make noise with, it's a couple, and they just started to talk constantly till about 5 a.m. But considering I copped it from two neighbours on the one night, I feel like I've been hammered a bit and am a little sleep deprived. But I thought I'd still do an update here because there seems to be a lot happening in the world, and I think it justifies a daily update. I'll start with the good news. Might as well get some positive stuff happening, and that is in regard to SpaceX. I won't go for too long on this one because it's just basically a headline in effect. They just had another Starlink mission where they launched 57 Starlink satellites. Now this is part of the huge internet system that they're building with satellites at low altitude that are going to provide very low latency, which means you can get the response time is much shorter than normally for satellites because they're traveling so close to Earth. That's the big selling point for them. But this is the 10th launch, so they've probably got around 500 or so, 550. They've lost a few along the way, but they generally launch around 60 satellites, but there was a ride-sharing arrangement with this particular flight. And there were two black sky global observation satellites included. They dropped them off first, and then they went into a different orbit and then dropped off the 57. They just pushed them off, actually. They just float away, and they eventually will find their positions in space in the next week or two or something. It takes a while for them to get into position. But that all went successfully. They recovered the booster rocket to bring the rocket up to the orbit. So they're very good at that. They've only had one failure of recent times. This one's flown 5 times. So they haven't had any of these rockets reused more than 5 times. So that'll be the next test. I think they're assuming they can get about 10 launches out of each rocket without having a huge amount of refurbishment. That's the plan anyway, but they haven't got beyond 5 at this stage. And so they tried to recover the fairings, which is the protective covering on the nose cone for the actual satellites. They're jettisoned once they're in space because then there's no atmosphere to interfere with the satellites. They dropped to Earth, but they weren't able to recover them in their recovery boats, which have got giant nets on them to actually catch these fairings. They're quite large, and they're worth a few $1 million, so it's certainly worthwhile trying to keep them out of the seawater. These ones actually went into the drink, which means there'll be more work done to refurbish them, as opposed to if they catch them in the air, then it reduces the refurbishment cost and time. So there is an incentive to do that, but it's a very hard task. And they've only successfully recovered 2 of them once, and that was the previous flight. So anyway, that overall pretty good few weeks for about 10 days actually for SpaceX. They had the astronauts come back. It's the first time a privately owned company has sent astronauts to the International Space Station and brought them home safely. So that's a big deal. There were only 2 of them this time because there's a demo type flight. The next flight there'll be 4 astronauts on it, and that'll be the first real mission, basically going back to the ISS. So it means they're not dependent on Soyuz, the old Soyuz spacecraft, to get to and from the space station. Now astronauts are able to fly in an American designed and built spaceship, which is a lot more high tech and luxurious by the looks of things as well. The Soyuz one is really cramped, real sardine job. The one that Musk has designed has got a lot of style to it. It's a minimalist style. I don't necessarily like his style. I think it may be too minimalist. I'm not overly impressed with the internal design of his Teslas, but that's just a personal, subjective choice. As far as the engineering is concerned, it's spot on. A man that knows his engineering, and that's the most important thing. So that was good. That all went well. And of course, he had the hop with the SN5. So it's been a great week for Elon Musk. So that's good news. But of course, the bad news, I guess you all know what the bad news is. It just continues on. The Garden State becoming the Gulag State. Just things are not getting better in Victoria. And I've got two differing opinions on it from journalists. It's interesting to see how. Well, actually, one of them is really he's a journalist, but he was actually a presenter on SBS and for many years, and his name's George Denikian, and he poured the bucket on Daniel Andrews. So I was very impressed with what George had to say. The headline, of course, is "Dump Dan Now," and I totally agree with that. I think George is really spot on with his evaluation about Daniel Andrews. He's the guy in control, and he should take responsibility, and he's done a lousy job. However, I've got a conflicting article. It's interesting. This one's actually from news.com. Now, this is interesting because George Denikian actually worked for SBS, which is, left of centre. It's a government station, not as bad as the ABC, but still pretty left of centre. But George Denikian I always thought was quite a credible talking head, a good news presenter. That was good to hear from him, that one. But to give an alternate view, we've got Joe Hindenbrand, and he's from Channel 10, and he thinks Dan resigning will make things worse. Now, I find that fascinating. His article goes on to say a Labor mate of his blamed Jeff Kennett, who hasn't actually been in power for 20 years. It just shows how out of touch the Labor Party are if they're still trying to blame Jeff Kennett for the sins of their current leader. I mean, that's absolutely bizarre. And he goes on and says, Joe keeps talking, and he says, Dan Andrews is probably the best choice. He's pretty genuine and dedicated leader. That's just Joe's opinion. Now, most journalists, of course, are pretty left-leaning, in my opinion, and I think it's pretty obvious which way Joe sways. And I find that a ludicrous evaluation of Daniel Andrews. I've never liked the guy. I think he's been incompetent, and he always likes to shove the blame elsewhere. That is not a good leader, but Joe tends to differ. Now, he goes on, he actually digs himself into a deeper hole, in my opinion, anyway. And Joe says, in conclusion, he's got us in this disaster, so he's the one to get us out of it. Interesting logic, Joe. I'm paraphrasing that, by the way, but that is in effect what Joe actually said at the end of his article. He honestly believes because Dan is the one who's been presiding over this disaster, he's the guy to fix it. Am I missing something in the logic stakes here? Am I getting something wrong? Is there something missing there? What would Mr. Spock say from Star Trek? I don't think he'd be too up on the logic of this one. But this guy's a modern journalist. And journalists, in my opinion, by the way, this was in news.com. So this is actually a News Corp article. So they would be regarded as extreme right-wing by crazy leftists in Victoria. I suppose you could say at least they're giving an alternate view in that media. It certainly wouldn't be the case in something like The Guardian or the Sydney Morning Herald. You're not going to get too many alternate views there. It's going to be correct, politically correct stuff all along the line. By the way, this Joe works for Channel 10 on Studio 10, which is sort of like a cheesy morning magazine style show, not pretty lightweight, fair, which is probably perfect for him given what he's written in this article, because I just find this astounding. But going on about journalism, I'm very depressed with the current state of journalism in Australia and in democracies in general in the Western world. I'll give an example of how woke and insular they've become. There was this was actually in Sky News, which is Sky News is actually would be veering more right of centre, if anything. But this particular journalist was talking about a by-election coming up where there were 2 female candidates. And what he said was, well, the good thing is they are both females, so we're going to win whichever way the electorate goes. In other words, we need more female representation in Parliament. Now, he's a journalist. That doesn't sound particularly unbiased to me. It sounds like it's a feminist line that is being pushed by him. Now, that is not good journalism. And that's the way journalists have gone now. It's the profession. Even though he's working for Sky News, which would be perceived as being the most right-wing media outlet in Australia, he still follows the journalistic line of pushing feminism ahead of merit. I've got no problem with having female MPs, by the way. As a matter of fact, our local councillor is Amy Eden, and she won out against the incumbent, who was a guy, someone I was disillusioned with and voted against. So I voted for the local female candidate. I have no problems with women in politics, but I do have a problem with them being selected because of their genitalia and their gender. It's ridiculous. Merit. What is so wrong with the concept of merit? It seems like in universities, merit now is a dirty word, and that's where a lot of this crap comes from, because journalists these days generally come from a university background. That's why they get this left-leaning look at life. It's just basically the prism that they're brought up in, and it's not healthy. Diversity, real diversity, is healthy. Diversity of opinion. I fully support that. And I'm happy to see other people, other commentators online that aren't right down the line with me. Like I watch Tim Pool every day, and I watch Sticks and Hammer 666. These are unconventional guys, but I've got to say, they've both got their finger on the pulse. And Tim Pool is definitely more left-wing than me, and Sticks would be closer to me as far as the politics is concerned. But he's not a conservative. He's actually a libertarian, and so is Tim, and that's where the common ground is. I could have a beer with these guys and have a really good chat, and there wouldn't be animosity. We'd just talk over subjects. And I mean, these are guys that would never get a Guernsey on mainstream TV because they don't look right. Tim Pool's a beanie-wearing ex-skateboarder, and Sticks is into. He writes books on the occult. He looks very alternative with long locks and a beard. He just doesn't look like a guy who you would go to get cutting edge political commentary. But that's what he does supply. I don't look at the guy, I'm not interested in how the guy looks, I'm interested in what they say, and his analysis is spot on. He was spot on with the last election in America, and I find that his methodology is better than any of the hacks you'll get on mainstream TV. He never looks at individual polls, he always looks at aggregates, because it's a much, much more accurate way of looking at what's happening. So even though he may be unconventional to look at, he's basically got the goods, and that's what I judge him on. Please consider subscribing to my channel if you think there's anything there of use to you, or entertainment or whatever. And either do that or give me a thumbs up, or if you're feeling really energetic, do both. That'd be great. But please don't ignore me. That's the worst thing you can do on YouTube, is be ignored.